Hi everyone, Homethany Work Tano here, the internet's busiest music nerd, and it's time for a review of the new Of Montreal album, Aureate Gloom. Of Montreal is an Athens-based rock and indie pop outfit, psych pop, garage, a lot of different genres in their music, and they are fronted by singer-songwriter, guitarist Kevin Barnes. The band is known as a part of the Elephant Six Collective, a collective of musicians that has seen a lot of indie darling success stories with groups such as Neutral Milk Hotel and Apples in Stereo, Olivia Tremor Control. Many of them were influenced by the pop and rock music of the 60s and filtered it through a kind of abstract, experimental, and modern-day, occasionally lo-fi lens. And with Of Montreal, that at first manifested itself in some kind of quaint acoustic ballads, as well as rock tunes with some kind of cute or maybe even surreal imagery. Songs such as Tim, I Wish You Were Born a Girl, or the song Everything Disappears When You Come Around. The lyrics on that song are insane. And after these initial records of Montreal sort of evolved into this very colorful, playful, absurd band while still pulling from those rock and pop influences from the 60s on records like Gay Parade. This early 2000s era for the band was actually a really prolific time with not only a handful of records coming out but a ton of different compilations. But they were very quick to evolve past this period in the mid-2000s as they started incorporating some electronics and some dance grooves into their stuff on albums such as Satanic Panic in the Attic. This stylistic shift put them on the track to become one of the most popular and celebrated indie bands of the 2000s. Some of the band's biggest singles ever came off of the record Sunlantic Twins, and right after came their biggest album success story with Hissing Fauna, Are You the Destroyer? This record actually kicked off an entirely different era in Of Montreal's career, a really maximal era with loads and loads of multi-tracked vocals, tons of synthesizers, various electronics, and rhythms, all layered together in this just impossibly dense pop music, and it actually made for some of my least favorite records in their discography. I think a lot of these albums like Skeletal Lamping and False Priest are just a little too gaudy. Now, the band is inching up on 20 years of age, and in this current evolution of theirs, they have kind of reeled back a lot of those electronics and have gone for a more organic sound. And even though reactions have been mixed to a lot of these newer Of Montreal albums, they have been kind of pleasing to me. This is territory that I see Kevin Barnes just functioning properly in, like on the many Baroque disco tracks on Paralytic Stalks, or the rock and psych pop fused with some folk music and alt country on Lousy with Sylvian Briar in 2013. And here on this new LP, Of Montreal continues with these wordy, witty, and colorful takes on vintage rock tropes. There's Baroque pop on this record, Kinks-style garage, Beatles-style pop, T-Rex styled glam rock, and even a few hard rock riffs that feel like they're pulled right out of the Led Zeppelin playbook. The last track on here in particular has a riff that sounds just like the riff featured on Led Zeppelin's Immigrant Song. So Of Montreal tips a little further in that hard rock direction than they usually would, but they still cover those usual bases of vintage rock and pop music you remember them covering. Kevin Barnes lyrically is as verbose as usual, even though this album might strike me just a little bit as unambitious. Still, Of Montreal has never really gone more than a few albums riding one idea or delivering one single sound, so, maybe they're kind of due for another evolutionary change. Maybe this album will be the last in this sort of little era of Montreal's career, and we'll get something entirely new with the next batch of records. As far as the material we're getting on this album, the whole LP kicks off with the single BASSEM SABRY, a disco-grooved song with some boomy kick drums and blaring guitars, and it's a smooth groove with a really peppy, upbeat feel and some pretty smart lyrics. To me, this song reads as a bit of like disillusioned hero worship. There are mentions of revolution in this track. The hook on this thing, crucifixion is my conduit. Barnes, when he wants to, he has this knack for making some really catchy phrases out of words that'll get you sort of grabbing for your dictionary just to try to decipher what exactly he is on about. There's definitely a war theme to this track, which is also mirrored in the cover art to the single. And I think some of these same themes come up at least a little in the track Virginian Lots, which also has some kind of violent, sad, destructive imagery in its lyrics. However, Barnes' tendency to really overload his songs with lyrics, such as on the song Last Rite at Jane Motel, he really loses focus of whatever the melody is supposed to be on the verse here and just kind of settles into this sort of forgettable talk singing, which really leaves these verses feeling kind of flat. And there are some other tracks here where Of Montreal, they take some risks, but they're very minor risks, and the payoff is very minor as well, if there even is any, such as on the other single, EMPYREAN ABATTOIR, which is a track I like. It's a danceable song. It's super subdued. The vocals are deadpan. It's definitely trying to pull together a dance track, but with a very quiet demeanor. And while I do like the song, it really hasn't done much for the album as a single, which it is. It just feels like more of a really solid deep cut. There are louder and just sort of more memorable tracks in the track listing here that I think would have made for a better single, though Masturbating Your Father's Pain is definitely a winning phrase from this song, and I do like the way this track occasionally coasts into some really dreamy guitar interludes. However, the dreaminess is actually kind of a turnoff on the song Aluminum Crown. The track features this slow, dramatically sung, very syrupy hook that's contrasted with these hard-rocking verses, and these two separate parts of this song that alternate seem like they just have very little to do with each other. Musically, sonically, it just kind of seems like they're jammed together into one song just because they have to be. And while I'm usually pretty into Kevin Barnes' musings on neo-feminist divinations and the Anatolian rock, as well as the raping of the embryonic virgin spring, the music's really got to appeal to me as well. You know, it can't just be the words, I guess. I'm not really enjoying as much as I am head-scratching at the out-of-nowhere hard rock riffs on the closing track, as well as Monolithic Egress, which is really a structural mess, really jumps from one song section to another. A lot like Aluminum Crown, these various parts don't really complement one another all that well. And then there's the weird, noisy soundscape that just enters with no warning whatsoever on the second half of the Chthonian dirge for Runk the Other, which to me just kind of feels like a way for the band to do something weird and unexpected without actually taking a risk. Don't get me wrong, there are some other tracks on this record that I like, tracks where it feels like Of Montreal are keeping up their kind of quirky, emotionally confusing, fun, colorful, punchy standards. But there are other songs on here, maybe the key tracks on this record, that I think are hinting towards something a little bit more experimental. And I actually wouldn't mind a more experimental Of Montreal. But if that's the direction they're going to be going in on their future output, with this record, I think they're really in the more shallow end of that pool. There are some hits on this record, some misses, tracks that are somewhere in the middle, and Kevin Barnes I still find to be a compelling frontman. You yourself, if you are a longtime fan, you might be interested in hearing the band venture out in the minuscule ways that they do on this record, but me personally, I'm not that into the kind of non-experiments and the somewhat needless non-sequiturs of this record. I'm feeling a strong 6 on this thing. Transition! Have you given this album a listen? What did you think of it? Did you love it? Did you hate it? Why? What do you think I should review next? And that's it! Anthony Fantano, Of Montreal, forever.